lost perspective of the fact that I was even there, but I was still perceiving. I was still the perceiver and I was still perceiving, but I wasn't in my body, and had this very, very brief experience of nothingness, like the absolute nothingness in which the everything is born from.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and that freaked the out of me.
Right. Right. Yeah.
Yeah, because the body stores so much of our emotions and our memories and allows us to access our unconscious. It's the 95% of what's actually determining our behavior is really living in our unconscious. And when we use the body to access it and bring it into awareness, we bring more of that 95% into our conscious awareness and can work with it more.
I want to welcome everybody back to another episode of The Soul Inspired. Today I have Leilah Simone with us. She is a transformational artist and coach, so I'm really excited with my art background. So I'm really excited to talk to her. She's also had a spiritual experience or a spiritual awakening. So we're going to dig into that a little bit. But first of all, thank you so much, Leilah, for coming on the show today.
Thank you so much for inviting me. I'm really excited to dive in. I think there's lots of parallels and mirrorings that are potentially there. So, yeah, I'm open to the flow that we move into.
Yeah, we had like a 2-minute introduction to meet each other. So we got a little bit of background, but this is where we're really going to get the meat and potatoes of who we are and find out everything that's happened in our lives. So I always generally start each episode the same way. And I just think about who you are. And I'm trying to get to know a little bit more about you. But if you can think of Leilah before your changes, okay, so who you were before everything happened. And if I can get a
Mm,
little bit of an, overview of who you were, who were you as a child and how did you kind of
mm.
get raised? Just a little bit of information about yourself.
Yeah, amazing. Um, I, as a child, was incredibly sensitive, very connected to nature. Um, I didn't realize that it was very open, very, yeah, connected to other aspects of reality that aren't just 3D. Um, I started dancing and training as a dancer, as a professional dancer from the age of 3, so very, very young.
Wow.
And so that actually meant that from the ages of 3 to 15, I had a lot of my expression and creativity contained. It was directed and lots of rules, and uh, in that lots of conditioning was patterned into me and through my body. It was like dancing the conditioning into my body of perfectionism and hypercriticism and hyper obsession, or like self consciousness, and this chameleon quality of being who I needed to be. And I was amazing at it, and I had this identity around me from as young as I can remember as the amazing dancer. So there's a huge amount of pressure of needing to be something, and of receiving love through and validation through performance and through being that. And my environment at home was I I have really amazing relationships with my family now. But my dad suffered from PTSD, and we also didn't realize he was on the spectrum, autistic. And my brother was incredibly very narcissistic, and we've had conversations of him connecting to traits of sociopathy. So it was a lot of mental and psychological bullying and abuse going on there in that relationship. And then my mother trying to keep the peace, and also a lot of neglect happening there from my childhood experiences. So all of these things really compounded in a way that by the time I was 15, I was in a very miserable place. I was engaging with the thing that I thought I loved, which was dance, because it had just come from me from such a young age naturally. And yet I felt miserable inside. I felt totally like I was a failure all of the time, even though I was getting so much external validation of being amazing and, you know, getting all these top ballet grades and whatnot. And so at that point, I actually gave up dance. Um, Everyone was confused. I was confused. It was an incredibly, yeah, traumatic experience to separate from something that I loved so deeply. And I dealt with that by just suppressing all of my grief. I didn't know how to process the grief around it, or how to even talk about it, and just was in a place of denial for about 7 years. And I wasn't dancing, um, and just got into a bit of, not trouble per se, but just started to do what I think I should do. Lots of partying, taking drugs, not really looking after myself, not eating healthily. I had a great job, but I'm grateful for that job because it wasn't really what my heart wanted to do. And that is basically the timeline up until I had this very sudden spiritual awakening moment where I got caught in a trance looking at myself with the mirror. And because I'd been so sensitive and taking so many drugs and psychedelics, I was sober when this happened. It was accidental, but it meant that my mind was just so open that um, I saw some stuff that I wasn't quite ready to see, basically,
Mm,
or I was ready to see it because it's all in divine timing. But it was such a profound experience that I essentially left my body, and connected with. This is kind of this is a whole kind of probably deep dive in and of itself because it was such a profound experience. So
yeah.
um, I don't know. You let me know if it makes sense to give an abridged version of that and kind of continue the story, or to dive into it. And I'm happy to do whatever you intuitively feel is right for the show.
Yeah, no, I'm loving this so far. And the first thing I want to say is you were totally right. When I was explaining a little bit about myself before you, I was giving you a 1 minute idea of who I was, and you're
Right.
saying this stuff, and it's like even the ages all kind of come around the same time frame when I was going
Right.
through my crisis of being like, yeah, I'm the musician, I'm the art, I'm the singer, and I'm like, no, I'm not doing that anymore, and just kind of ran away from it. And
Mm,
I didn't, and oddly, when you said about this mirror, I'm really interested to hear what happened. But oddly,
mm,
I had a moment like that too, where I was just kind of like looking at myself in the mirror. I'm like, who are you? And
mm,
but I stopped myself. I turned away from it and I didn't do it. It's just weird that you said the mirror thing because that's exactly what I did. I never ever mentioned that to anybody. So
mm,
that's interesting. I definitely want to dig in and see what happened. This gives me an idea who you were. So you were
mm,
someone who was looked at as the dancer. You started so young, it became a piece of who you were. It
mm,
was pretty much the DNA of who you are and who you had to be for everyone. And then at some point around that age, that's around the age you start to question things in life, like your adolescence, your teenage years, just getting a little older than that, you start to really question like the purpose, like why that whole idea of like, what am I doing? Like what impact am I making on the world? So those types of things start happening around that age. But no,
mm,
yeah, if you want to dive in, so you said that you were looking into this mirror,
mm,
and yeah, if you want to actually describe exactly how it happened, what happened, this
mm,
audience is definitely more than welcome to hear any type of
mm.
experience and how it happened because we've heard some all kinds of different things on this channel. So,
Yeah, yeah. And yeah, as you say that, what intuitively comes is that it feels that we all have different keys and different stories, and they help each of us understand things even more. So I'm more than happy to share it because it was a very difficult experience. And
mm,
if it can help someone else, then yeah, absolutely. I'm more than happy to go into the detail. Um, yeah. So as I was saying, that my mind was very open at that point, and I had, because I'd been taking psychedelics, but I was managing this anxiety as well from repressing all my emotions of not dancing and that grief. Um, I had learned, I had intuited the the kind of spiritual idea of letting go, but I'd never had any connection with uh, a spiritual teacher up until that point. So it was very scientific background, quite nihilistic, things exist or they don't exist, very empirical, very binary way of like seeing the world. Um, and but that intuition of how to work with my anxiety in my psychedelics meant that I was experiencing more and more. I was opening up more and more and
Mm-hmm.
almost expanding my consciousness in these psychedelic realms. So it meant that when I went into this experience, I had been primed a little bit, and
Mm-hmm.
everything is divine timing. But I had really, now that I look back on it, I feel like I was primed. And what happened was, I mean, the reason why I even had the idea of looking at myself in the mirror was because I was so interested with consciousness and how we're aware of ourselves. And I'd come across this experiment where people had where they'd actually documented the results of people looking into each other's eyes. And it was a scientific experiment with lots of people, and they had documented a drug-free induced altered state of consciousness. And at that time, I was like, oh, sounds really interesting.
Right.
And it was based, I was like, right, like, what does that mean? If you haven't experienced that before, you're like, what does that mean? And I didn't realize that I was experiencing it with the psychedelics. Um, and uh, it was based on an experiment where people had looked at themselves in the mirror. So I was like, oh, anyone could do that. So that idea had been seeded beforehand, and that's kind of the context that leads to the point where I am sat in front of the mirror in the bathroom, and the thought comes into my mind of like, oh, that experiment of looking each other at yourself in the mirror. Um, and as soon as that thought pops into my mind, I haven't really had enough time to process it, because I essentially got caught by the idea that I suddenly had like never seen my face before. Like I was looking at myself in the mirror, and it was like I had never seen my face ever, like a total stranger. And I was caught just like
Mm.
that. I was like totally caught in this like, what? Like when you gasp and you're in awe of something, and
Right.
there's like a blank moment, and then that blank moment continued. And now I see that I was in a very, very, very deep and sudden state of meditation.
Mm-hmm.
But at the time I was just like awestruck, at that experience. And so as I was looking at myself, the image started to shift, and it was kind of morphing as I was in this trance. And after I had seen myself as a stranger, I then lost perspective of space. So I lost perspective of the fact that I was looking at myself in the mirror.
Mm-hmm.
I lost perspective of the fact that I was even there, but I was still perceiving. I was still the perceiver, and I was still perceiving, but I wasn't in my body. Um, and so as that happened and I lost perception of space, what I saw became almost 2D, but it was also 3D and 2D all at the same time. And my face started to move through these different expressions or different lenses of perceiving myself. So initially I looked like an abstract painting, that where my face was simultaneously arranged in this way, but also uh, misarranged and kind of contorted and distorted.
Wow.
Um, and I continued to just experience these different moments, and it was really beautiful. There was no fear at this point. It was really just blank mind, open, childlike receptivity, and taking it all in and going really deep with it. And I lost perception of space, but I also lost perception of time. And I only know how long I was in that state because I was living with my brother at the time. Um, and he told me when I eventually came out. Um, and so I'm there in the mirror, and my face is shifting, my perception is shifting, and just as this experience is starting to come to a close, the perspective or the image that I can see, if you can imagine a tapestry or like a piece of clothing where the way it gets pinched and it's turned and there's this like warping. I don't know if you can see what
Yeah.
I'm trying to illustrate there. Um, but the image, I wouldn't even know how to describe that, but what I was perceiving outside of my body, what I was perceiving was the image twisting and warping. And as it twisted and warped, it was also separating, it was also spreading. And as it spread, what was behind it was just blackness, just void.
Mm.
Um, and as soon as I perceived the void, I connected with something very deep inside of me, like the void inside of me and inside all of us. And had this very, very brief experience of nothingness, like the absolute nothingness in which the everything is born from.
Hmm.
Um, and that freaked the out of me.
Right. Right. Yeah. Yeah.
Totally, totally. Don't know if swearing is allowed in this, but it freaked me out.
Yeah.
Um, and as soon as that happened, I had this very intense fear reaction and I sucked myself out of the experience. And then all of a sudden, I was back in the room, but I was abundantly aware of the fact that I had not been in my body, that I was not in the room, and I didn't know where I had gone. I was like, where did I just go? What the hell just happened?
Right.
Um, I
Wow.
can pause there. Yeah, I can pause there. Yeah.
Yeah, no, that's amazing. Thank you so much for sharing that. So, so many things to tap into with that. So
Mm,
your experience, wow, I really love, and this really is interesting because of your artistic nature, who you
mm,
are. When you're giving a detailed expression of what happened, you get in
mm,
such detail. Like the idea of like taking your shirt and kind of like turning it. I'm a visual person, so I can immediately sense what you're talking about.
mm,
What my interpretation is that so you had this trance moment, right?
mm,
Observing yourself, and your awareness heightened. Your awareness
mm,
heightened to a point of being aware of yourself for the first time, like not
mm,
yourself, not you know Leilah waking up and having her breakfast and like not that self, like the awareness of who really you are. And
mm.
that was around 15, you said, between 15 to 16. Is that about the age?
No, no. So that was around 21. So it was
Oh,
around
okay.
the after I had not danced for 7 years or so, and I was kind of lost in
Okay.
this world of being who I needed to be and partying and taking drugs and had a great job, but miserable inside, essentially. And then
Right.
that happened, that was really like a universe intervening and saying, nope,
Yeah.
can't do that. That's not going to continue. Yeah.
So it's almost like you had some time to try something different, and because possibly you're going down the wrong path, you're like, okay, I'm gonna have this experience now. It's gonna remind me of who I really am, and it's gonna shake me to my core. That's kind of
Hmm.
what I got to it, and the idea of it's interesting, this blackness behind you, this nothingness that we talk about. I've spoke to so many people over the years who've had that type of reality shift. Um, um, Sometimes it was on a psychedelic, sometimes it wasn't. Sometimes it was just a natural occurrence that happened in an experience. So,
Yeah.
because some people will blame it on the psychedelic, some people will say, "Oh, that's because you were on drugs," and then they just move on from there. And it's like, right, but the only problem with that is those people have had these experiences who aren't on psychedelics. So that kind of gets rid of that entire equation. The psychedelic could help you get there. It's the same aspect I bring up a lot of times. People go and do ayahuasca and they do these different, you know, healing medicines that can really take them into an altered state. And you got to be careful what you ask for because it can get pretty real pretty quick. And it sounds like you had this experience, then you get to that moment, and then the nothingness and everything and the reality of what was actually happening to you, or the non-reality of what was happening to you, I should say, scared you, and it brought you back, and it was like right coming back. I had a similar experience one time during a meditation. It was a woman online. She told me to look at her forehead. It was just a guided meditation. I had done meditations many times, and I was sitting there watching her, and this is in my mid 20s, early 20s maybe, and I was looking at her, and all of a sudden I'm looking at myself looking at her. I was like aware that I was watching her. Like I was aware that I was looking at my computer. Like if you were to look at from behind over here, and I was like, oh, that's interesting. And then I went, wait, what? And the moment that panic set in, I come out of it, and I was like, what was that? You know, and it was the only time I've ever experienced that. And it was very quick. It felt very quick, but it was a moment that I'll never forget. And that when you said you scared the, you know what, out of you, like that is what I felt at that time too. It was like this, what's going on?
Very
So
primal. It's a very primal fear of, and it's the ego fear too. Like, nope,
yeah,
that's too much for me to handle right now, which of course is not too much for us to handle because it happened. But the ego can't wrap itself around that because it's just too profound and it's too nuanced and paradoxical. Um,
absolutely.
um,
And it's not what it's used to. So it doesn't it right away it notices that something is different. And it's like, I'm bringing you back, like you're coming back to this.
I exactly.
Okay, so this experience happens to you, and we'll dig into the implications of it and what it did to you. But I do want to ask you one question before I lose track of this explanation that you've had.
Mm,
Have you since then
mm,
come to realize more of what the nothingness was,
mm,
so that it's not fearful? Like, have you since then? Because when you say that, I've brought this up in past experience. People have had experiences. They're like, "Oh, it was so beautiful when I died. I went to nothing." It's like, what? Like that to me, that doesn't sound like a good day. Like I'm like, that doesn't sound like a good time. And then
mm.
when it's tried to be when people try to express it in human terms, it's usually pretty difficult to express. So then I'm always curious when I hear that, I go, okay, so at that time you had a little bit of fear around it, but was it the fear the experience of it itself, or was it the nothingness that scared you?
It was the nothingness. I think at that time, that my ego had not been had no spiritual references or framework to
Mhm.
work with. So it was operating from this very nihilistic based scientific perspective of life, which is it either exists or it doesn't exist. And if it can be measured, it exists. And if it can't be measured, then it doesn't exist. And so what that what that shook up in me was this fear and this very existential fear that I would just disappear at any moment. That it was because it just touched the nothingness. There was this anxiety that I was walking around with. Um, yeah, that at any moment I would just poof disappear and everything would disappear. And it really felt like the curtain of the universe had just been like peeped open and yeah, I came out of that and I was like, I I didn't really want to see that.
Mm.
I didn't, and that was where I was, you know. It did take a lot of time to reconcile that into a place where I'm now in a place of much more peace and connection with it and work with it more. There's not so much fear there, but there is a somatic, like a body aspect to it. When you experience something so deeply traumatizing and that it doesn't have to be traumatizing, but because of that reaction that I had, the reaction created the trauma. And so that like body aspect of it is something that I'm continuing to work with and I continue to deepen into it and Yeah, a huge tool that has allowed me to do that is by getting into the body. Like the body has been my way of integrating that experience, because that was such an out of body experience, and it's trying to really bring it home into my body, into where I am located in space and time now.
Mm.
And so I'm definitely still in that process. Um, but when I came out of that, yeah, when I came out of that experience, it was really my first, um, it was my first moment of really interacting with the limits of my human capacity, and mentally, in a mental way, because what I then was experiencing back in the room was a very almost fragmented perception of reality, where it was almost as if every single infinitesimally like small moment was a snapshot that was stitched together. And so every single moment, whether it was a blink of an eye or it was just like a shift of like the tiniest details, all seemed to be deeply connected in cause and effect. And I was seeing this cyclical pattern of birth and death and birth and death and birth and death and birth and death and birth and death just happening instantaneously all the
Mm.
time. And yeah, it was incredibly terrifying, because I again was coming with that lens of science and this Western understanding of the mind. And I really had this, it felt like this negotiation happened where I could almost see different timelines of, this is what people put people in mental health hospitals for. My life's going to be like this. I'm going to be medicated. I'm going to be diagnosed and be labeled. I'm going to go down that route. Like I've done it. This is it. I've broken my mind.
Right.
That was where my ego wanted to go. And the gift in it was that for me in that moment, somehow I was able to connect to something deeper that just said no, like that, no, that's not what's happening. I don't understand what's happening, but I choose to believe that this is a gift, and that this is uh, somehow there's a meaning to this somehow.
Right.
Um, and it doesn't include me being psychotic, and it doesn't include me being mentally ill, which if I had spoken to someone at that time, 100% they would have said that I was having an episode of some sorts. And I
Mm-hmm.
and my intuition knew that that would have been so detrimental to hear that, and totally something that can be recovered from. To have that label, I always believe that there is healing always, but it does make it much harder when you are labeled that, because it comes from a mindset that you are somehow broken and there's something wrong with
Mm-hmm.
you. And when you start to believe that about yourself, it's a difficult belief to shift. It's difficult to come from that, and people do, but something about that moment, and it wasn't me who decided that, because Lila's ego wanted to go down the like, oh my god, I'm gonna be in a hospital and this is gonna happen, and like panic, that was where my ego wanted to go. And spirit, divine, universe, consciousness, God, whatever you call it felt like that deeper aspect of self came through and was just
Mm.
took that option off the table. It was just like, nope, that's not what's happening. It's scary and you don't understand it, but just ride it.
Right.
And
Yeah.
yeah,
Okay. In a moment, I wanna dig in a little bit to this body movement type thing stuff that you're doing that kind of integrated. It sounds like you had like an integration going on there, but I do want to touch on just a few quick things. So
yeah,
when you're mentioning, the words fear or scared and all these things right away, from even just my short time talking to people who've had near-death experiences and people who've had spiritual experiences, it's really your ego. This entire time, it's your ego that has the fear. The ego is confused by what you experienced, and it doesn't make sense because the whole point of the ego, the whole purpose of it is to keep us grounded here, right? So if you're giving it something that questions that, then it's like it is like a psychosis, I would assume. And it's amazing that you were somehow able to dive in and do what you did to not allow yourself to get too fearful of that, because that would be fearful. I can see why. And you probably now have a very heightened understanding of how some people can go down that road with, if they've had an experience, if they've had a bad psychedelic trip, if they've had near death experience. Some people actually, after near death experiences, really struggle in talking about their experience because of that exact reason. They're scared people are going to have this judgment. So you're touching on all these things. Now, what's really fascinating is, I keep going back to this nothingness thing, is the ego. The
Back
ego, yeah,
to
yeah. It's like the ego is scared of this nothingness or whatnot, right? Because we are, you're Leilah, I'm Joe, and we have our personalities and we are attached to who we are with our ego. Yet somehow, right? Yet somehow, when people cross over, this has come up a lot, they go to the other side and they'll see their past loved ones and they'll come to them. Their souls will come up as a, could be a just light coming to them, and then they form into what they looked like when they remember them from Earth or from when they were here. And that personality of that person is still intact. They make a joke that's similar to what they were like before. Um, they're the essence of who they were while incarnated in that life. I do believe in reincarnation and stuff, but in that life is essentially the same. So that soul, that piece of us that leaves when we pass, still had something intact, and it's not ego, but it's something higher. It's something about who we are, even detached from ego. It still exists. So your fear is that a complete loss of yourself. But from what I've gathered or seen, it seems that there's a part of us that still continues because, do you understand what I'm saying? So it's that's the part I'm trying to understand, because here you are in your body having this fear of loss of yourself in the nothingness. Yet when we go to the nothingness, it's not nothingness. It's not really, is essentially nothingness, but it's different from this. So I'm
Right.
wondering how you feel around that. Do you have a better understanding of that? Like, I don't know what you've done since that. I'm assuming you're someone who does meditation and probably tries to get in touch with yourself through your dance and things like that. Is there any kind of, have you come to any new terms about how you've overcome that fear more?
Mm. Yeah, yeah, I love the line of thinking and reflections and questions. Um, yeah, meditation and yoga were the two places I went to, specifically meditation initially because I'd been turned so inward, I was suddenly very aware of, oh, I'm in a body, and like, oh, my mind is just like going crazy
Right.
of all these things, just very, very suddenly like aware and in my body, and was aware of the location of myself. Um, so meditation, yes, was like very, very important. And I spent the next 8 years really, it's almost like there was this curiosity that was born because I was questioning reality. I was questioning my whether I would disappear or not. And my dream state became much more aware, awake, lucid. Um, and that curiosity drove me to pursue altered states of consciousness through natural forms. And I see that again as I look back on it, that was the path that I went. It was really trying to get an understanding of that state from methods that felt safer to me, that felt like there was lineages and there was wisdom and knowledge really backing the ways in which people entered those states. And I was very interested in ayahuasca before that experience. And afterwards, I had this longing inside of me, and it was this sadness of, I really want to experience ayahuasca. I really want to sit with, but I'm just too scared. I'm just too scared because I had spoken with other people who had sat with ayahuasca, and I'm like, I know what you're talking about. Like, I know I resonate with your experiences. I haven't sat with ayahuasca before, but I know what you're talking about.
Hmm.
And I think this is the beautiful thing, is that and it's touching on what you were saying earlier about how we see that psychedelics it is a way of touching that, but it is a shortcut. It's a shortcut to a place that we can access. We can access ourselves. We can access through the technology that we are, and the plants are really there to remind us of that. And eventually, with some people, they boot them out and say, like, you need to stop taking us because you need to find a way to connect to that yourself. You need to
Hmm.
find a way to be in that yeah, resonance and connection with source, universe, consciousness, energy. And so yeah, through these different meditation, yoga, and dance, that was, and it was meditative movement really that was allowing me to integrate all of that, the nuance of that experience of being in the void, but also being in the dance of life and being in my body, and allowing my mind and my body and my heart and my spirit to come together. And that was that harmony I found in dance, as well as through meditation and yoga. And it really, that took me to learn more about myself, to learn more about the human and our psychology and how we work. And you know, it's a curiosity that initially started off as an existential crisis of, oh my gosh, I'm going to disappear, and then slowly soften with that fear and allow it to just become a natural curiosity of reconnecting, of connecting spirit with body. um and most recently I have come actually back to, only a couple of times I've sat with ayahuasca and with a hero's dose of mushrooms. And all about that man, that, and he wasn't a shaman, but he had sat many times and held space many times for people taking hero's dose of mushrooms, and it was 6 grams, so it was a high dose. And we'd spoken a lot, and he had near-death experiences. And so we had shared a lot and talked a lot, and I was sharing that desire to sit with plant medicines, but that there was that fear there because of what had happened when I was younger. And what was really beautiful about that ceremony that we had was, it was a little bit of a typical, like, my friends that know me, it's like a Leilah-ism, where accidental things happen. And you know, if I just thought it through a little bit more, I would have realized. But when he said a hero's dose, I just thought, oh, like metaphorically, you know, like a hero's dose, so you know, like that kind of thing. And I didn't look up the figures, I just put my full trust in him because we'd had these conversations. And I do not recommend this for anyone else. This is not something that I think is wise. Um, it's just what my experience was, and what was allowed to happen was that I went beyond what I would have. What if I had consciously known that I would have done? I would have maybe sat with 2 grams and seen how I was, you know, and edged
Hmm.
myself in.
Right.
But what that experience allowed was for me to actually go beyond what I thought was possible for me. And in the ceremony, we brought that into the space. And I had consumed, I could really feel that fear come up of, I think that's as much as, like, even though I intuitively trusted that what was meant to happen was the hero's dose, but there was so much fear. There was just so much fear there. And he asked me, what are you afraid of? And I said, I'm afraid of getting lost. I'm afraid of losing myself.
Mm.
Um, and so he said to me, okay, so we pray to getting lost. We welcome it. We allow ourselves to go and get lost. And I was thinking, like, what? I was like, what the heck? Like, what kind of foolishness is this? This is crazy, kind of thing. And he was like, and it's your choice. It's your choice. So anyway, I went in because it felt that it was right. It was a huge amount of fear, but what it allowed me to do was to learn how to trust, to
Mm.
trust so deeply. And that journey and that ceremony ended up being, that was the only lesson that came through in the mushroom ceremony. And usually there's lots of little messages and it's playful and it's, but there was this consistent theme all the way through of loving trust. And in that journey, I touched the void again. I actually touched that state that you're speaking to,
Mhm.
of this place where I was totally away from my body, totally away from my body, and totally away from any understanding of a 3D reality.
Mhm.
But the essence of me, the
Mhm.
essence of me was there in the middle of this void. I had this really beautiful vision. There were many visions, but one of these very potent visions that kind of illustrates what that felt like was I saw my name being written and simultaneously unwritten at the same time. Like that was one of the visions that I saw when I was in this state, when I was
Mm.
not in my body and not me, but the essence of me was coming through. And yeah, there was this rebirthing moment in that, this sweetness and this love and this this part of me that I got to connect with as the essence of me that was away from Leilah as I know her in this body and in this life.
Right.
So there have been a series of things that have allowed me to re-access that experience, either through meditation, but the few times that I've sat with psychedelics, with plant medicines, it's allowed me to understand that they're showing us a state that we can get to ourselves and that there's nothing to fear in that place.
Mhm.
Whilst our ego fears that place, there is nothing to fear because that essence of us remains. And it's this wispy, like you could separate it like it's tissue paper, like it's so yeah, it's a beautiful experience. It's a beautiful experience, and I'm not I'd be curious as well if that's anything that near-death experiences connect to too, and have their own experiences of. um
Oh no,
yeah.
I would just from talking with different people, that's exactly what they experience. They experience, it's kind of like what I was going to say was you think about the fact that you were born however many years ago, you came into this world, you're just this little baby, you come out of the womb, and your ego, or it may be happening inside of the womb, but whenever you start to become Lila,
Mm,
your ego turns on. It's like turning a power, like a something on. There's a power that comes on. And over your life, you're building this ego of who you are. But before that, there was no Lila. Like there was no Lila on Earth. There was the essence of who Lila was going to be, or who you were before you became this egoic human. Okay. And so that's the way I see it. And that we build this up. And the longer we go, you hit your 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s, whenever people decide to start really looking into who they are, you've now had those amount of years that have created who you think you are.
mhm,
And essentially, from what I get from near death experiences, or people who've had spiritual transformation experiences, or people who've had even psychedelic experiences, is they realize that who they thought they were is not who they are, right?
mm,
who
Mm,
they are is who they are deeper than who they think they are. Sorry if I keep saying things in strange ways, but it's at such a deeper core. When you said you've seen yourself, your name being written and unwritten, that to me
mm,
speaks volumes, because what it's saying is you still exist beyond this. It's like you're this or you're not this, but you're still you. Your essence of you is still there,
mm,
right? So it's breaking that fear. Now, what I found fascinating about what you do is you use dance now. You were a dancer before. As a musician, I'm sitting here thinking, okay, I've been a musician my whole life and writing songs, and sometimes I don't know where they come from and all these things. How is
mm,
it now that you, and I don't want to put words in your mouth, so I don't know if you actually feel this way, but I'm assuming maybe you work with people, things like that now, or you work with the things that you're doing with your dance. I'm assuming you're enjoying it more now than you did when you were doing dance in your younger years. And I'm wondering how you changed that. Like, what did you do different? What do you do different in your dance that affects you in a different way or helps affect other people? I'm just wondering
mm.
what the kind of work you do, if you can kind of expand on those types of things. Like, why is that different than what it was before?
Yeah, yeah, I love that. And I can hear your intuition of it, of your experience. That's why there's so many beautiful parallels there
Right.
that make this really rich. It's a really rich conversation. I love it. Um, yeah, definitely. I mean, to be suddenly turned on and to be suddenly aware that you're this in this body, it changes everything. It changes how you relate to everything and yourself by being, yeah, by becoming awake. And I do believe that awakening is a process. So it's not just like you're awake and there you go. And for some people, it is sudden and it is full. But for a lot of people, it's that there's moments and moments and moments again and again of awakening. And the dance became a tool within that process of awakening. It became a process of understanding what I was bringing internally to my dance, which was initially it was very uncomfortable because unless I was on a dance floor and I was in a dark nightclub, and I stopped taking drugs after that point because my anxiety could not handle, any kind of journeying. But I
Mm.
was still going to nightclubs and I was still on a dark dance floor, and I could find that connection there because it was, for me, there was this conditioning from a child around not wanting to be seen. I didn't want to be seen because um there was so much pressure that I put on myself that being watched changed how I felt when I moved. So I needed these very
Mm.
conditional environments in which I could dance and enjoy it, and everything else was not enjoyable. And because I no longer had drugs to kind of create these peak experiences in my life, and because of how disruptive that experience was, I really went on a inward journey and a journey of self-discovery, and dance was really, really key in that because, yeah, as I said, as I would move, it would trigger because our body stores our memories, our emotions, and so when we do anything with our body, there is the potential for something to be released and triggered. And so as I would move, these triggers would arise, and I would learn how to be with those parts of myself that I didn't like, that felt really
Mhm.
uncomfortable, um, in a more harmonious way. And initially, meditation really helped with that. So, in entering into dance in a very meditative way and really connecting to the felt sense of my body and redirecting my attention every time something difficult came up. Um, and then slowly, as I started to train more and more and learn more and more about the self, about the self and about the human and how to work with the human in different ways, those tools then started to weave into my dance more and more. And um the like the trauma work that I did and the trauma training that I did gave me so much more understanding and so much more compassion, which allowed me to soften even more for things that I found really difficult to come up. And dance became this tool that was simultaneously a trigger as well as
Mm.
a healing mechanism, as well as a way of integrating everything, of learning, of repatterning my body to feel safe with, yeah, to feel safe with certain things that I had not felt safe with before. Um, so it was really this retraining myself or unlearning my previous training of focusing on everything outside and judging myself and being obsessively perfectionist about things, and to really coming into the presence of
Mhm.
now again and again and again. And yeah, because that conditioning was, yeah, wired into me in such a way, it required more than just meditation on my journey. It really required me to bring all this understanding uh, of the psyche and going deep with Jungian psychology to really understand, okay, so how do I work with my mind? Because there's so many different parts of me and there's so many different aspects of self that are conflicting and that are sabotaging and that are trying to protect me, essentially, which is what the ego is trying to do. And that really has informed a lot of the work that I do now. It's really approaching approaching the process of self-discovery and healing and creating the life that you want to by looking at every aspect of who we are here. We're spirit, we're mind, we're body, we're heart. Um, and each of those aspects of our 3D self require different tools to work with them, or different lenses, or at least that's been my perspective, that's been my journey. I've some tools have been amazing for connecting me to my heart, but other things have been more amazing for working with the multiplicity of my mind, and other things have been better for me to connect to my body. And so weaving all those things together and all those tools together comes out in my coaching relationships. So that's one-on-one, and there'll be a whole plethora of tools that happen in that, and movement is a really key part of that too. And so yeah, because the body stores so much of our emotions and our memories and allows us to access our unconscious. It's the 95% of what's actually um, determining our behavior is really living in our unconscious. And when we use the body to access it and bring it into awareness, we bring more of that 95% into our conscious awareness and can work with it more. So yeah, the body is a beautiful way to bring that up, to trigger it, and then we work with it and release it and let it go so that we
I
can connect with
Yeah,
more of our yeah.
I love all of that because you're talking, I mean, you're speaking my language because in the arts and music that you're unconscious. So I always find myself in a worse place when I've let go of my music, when I haven't been authentic in my own journey, my own musical journey. So that's when I start to build issues, you know, whether it's physical ailments or whatever it is, because your unconscious mind has a mind of its own, essentially. And art, meditation, music, all these different things that are forms of tapping into something that's bigger than us. That's how you kind of reach your unconscious mind and work through your traumas and the things you have to go through. So I completely understand where you're going with that. The thing that I got from what you said is because what I was curious about is, you know, you were this little girl learning how to dance, going through all the ideas of dance and everything like this. I'm again looking at myself, being a musician, learning songs, and then okay, once I'm, you know, in my late teens, okay, time to start busking and get into a bar and get into these environments that weren't even really like filling me up, but I was just the monkey, I was just the entertainer, and just play, just do what everybody wants you to do. Um, Going from that into a place of no, this is a gift, and I'm gonna let go of my distractions around me, like let go of everything, put myself in a better environment and get myself into this place that is authentic. So it sounds like you became your more authentic self through your movement and through your dance, and you quit allowing the distractions around you to um not allow you to express the way that you're wanting to express, because that's why we're given these gifts, right?
Mhm.
I don't know if I'm making sense, but that's the way I feel it, because that makes sense for me. And I know when I'm in a good place with my music, and I know when I'm not in a good place. And I also know what that does to my body, what that does to my energy, my feelings, my emotions. And if I'm not tapping in correctly, it's like I'm almost like offline. I don't know, something's off when that happens. And it sounds like
Yeah.
now you're using your body and your dance to express and to show, you know, how you can feel from a place that's bigger, higher than yourself. And you said you do coaching. So you coach others doing similar things with movement, or is it just like just coaching from a mind perspective?
it's it's a whole mix of everything. So there is some talking, so we might unpack something with talking and then go into the body and then let something release there. And so
Mhm.
it's a very holistic way of working with the whole person. um Sometimes people find it really hard to get into their body, and so you have to initially work with the mind because there's all these defenses before getting into the body. And so, and having that range means that, yeah, you can just support more people, really. Um, but I definitely, what you've said and what you've reflected, that is, it very much resonates, and it is really my process too, of that, coming into your authenticity. And I do believe that we actually all have a gift, and that some of us have found it and that others, maybe we're still looking for it. But I do believe that we all have a unique expression that wants to come out. And um, whether that's through creating events or bringing people together or creating a new formula or creating a piece of music or a beautiful canvas. um, we're all inherently creative, is what I believe, and
Hmm.
that we're here to create something. It's just some of us maybe find it and others don't connect to it, but that it's still there. And so really allowing us to access um that stream of energy that is creative. And I have come to see that my creativity is not mine, it's what I'm allowing to move through me. Like you said, like the songs, you're not sure where they come from. They just come through you, and you become a channel for it. And I think um there's this beautiful way of interacting with life when you have a spiritual perspective, that everything is spiritual.
Hmm.
Of course you can create art from a place uh that's not a spiritual process. um of course, we've seen that many times before. But on some level, I would even challenge that and say that it likely is a spiritual process that just hasn't been identified yet. Because in order to create, you're constantly coming up against your limitations, against your relationship with structure and your sense of love and your sense of um, using limitations in a way that you've never used them before. So you're moving beyond your comfort zone, you're becoming, and you're allowing something to be created that hasn't necessarily existed before. And that is a transformational process. Like to create something that has never existed before
Right.
requires transformation. So yeah, I do believe that there's this inherently transformative quality that happens when we allow art to move through us. Um and in that we connect with however universe consciousness wants to express through us in this life.
And I love how you talked about, like, for me, for instance, so I coach musicians a lot, and a lot of them express that they want to write a song, and they'll ask me, how do you do it? And I'll explain. I'll be like, oh, well, you're lucky because you can just, when you're in the right place, it just comes through you. And they'll be like, "Oh, how do I do that? I don't know what to do." And they kind of get the mind. It starts to kind of like, I don't know how to do this. I don't know how to do this. And probably the same thing with dance or art, any type of art or any type of creativity. I like how you also put it in the idea of, someone who's doing, maybe they're creating events, or maybe they're a writer, or maybe but we express our creativity in different ways, but the idea is there's this authenticity we're all seeking. We're all wanting it to be natural. And my biggest thing that I've found with people I work with is sometimes you need to kind of like kickstart things. Sometimes you need to really get out there and just start writing, start dancing, even if it feels awkward, until it doesn't feel awkward, because the body sometimes needs to forget. Like our egos are always trying to come in and take control. And that's part of its job. But sometimes it's almost like it's an overdrive. And we have to be like, no, I'm not the master to my ego. My ego's the master to me. There's a higher self that we need to keep it in check.
Mm.
So I just like how you expressed it that way. And you said that you work with people. How do people get in contact with you? Is there like do you only work in person? Do you work online? Like how does that work?
I work online. I have been working in person, but I've just switched to working online. Um, you can find me at I am Leilah Simone on Instagram and I am leilahsimone.com. Uh, all the contact is through there. And I will be in the new year releasing programs that are around connecting to creativity and what it is to authentically express and to use all of your faculties as a way of guiding yourself through life in alignment with your authentic creative expression in life. So yeah, it's definitely a journey. It's a journey, and I think that's something that's not spoken often enough about in the personal development space, in the spiritual space. Well, maybe not the spiritual space, but in the personal development space, because we as humans, we want results, and often people don't engage with things unless they know that they're going to get a result. That's part of the ego. It's like, oh, a way of keeping us safe, and that it is this process, it is this journey, and the program is really there to instill the like the principles and the um a method that allows you to meet with your challenges in a way that can be channeled into creativity, so that you're really using your ego and your emotional reaction and learning a way to actually use it as fuel for
Mhm.
whatever it is that you're creating.
So it's basically a form of self-discovery of who we truly are. It's essentially the same thing.
Yeah.
It's having more control. I don't want to say have more control, because when I think of control, we don't want to be controlling, but it's odd because you want to lose control of your ego, but your ego is so important. It keeps you grounded to who you are. If we didn't have ego, what's the point? We'd just be kind of staring at a screen. We wouldn't be actually involving ourselves in who we are wanting to become over our life. That's the whole purpose of why we come here. So maybe it's like a nice balance to not forget of who we are as a higher self. I just want to know, because you've said a lot today. And with this whole idea of, earlier on we were talking about, you had this experience and you discovered the nothingness in these things. Do you feel at this point you've worked on yourself enough that you're starting to lose that fear around what it is we are beyond this life? Or are you still attached? Do you still feel really attached? I'm just wondering if the fear has kind of subsided a bit.
Yeah, the fear has subsided, definitely. And I'm too humble to say that the fear is gone, because I think if we have an ego and a nervous system, it's here to keep us alive in the way that it knows. So that's still there for
Mhm.
sure. Um, but it feels very integrated, and there's not this the word that's coming to mind is this demonic kind of quality to it that I had before,
Mm.
this idea of it being evil or it being bad or it being, yeah, something to be feared, essentially. um and and the feedback I get is the more I ground actually into my body and become more present here, the more I open up to to receive in more psychic capacity, and it's the same in that same process of releasing fear. And as it's like that shamanic territory where being able to approach different dimensions and different entities or energies in a way where you're coming from love and you're not coming from fear.
Mm,
And I've
yeah.
had to learn that because I opened up so much that if you continue to be in fear, then yeah, you kind of end up like the exorcism of Emily Rose. You're just like totally possessed and like terrified and paranoid, and you know it's there's really, you can choose that, but it is a choice to choose that. There is something within all of us that can allow us to choose to surrender and to let go. And that it connects to dance, because that for me, because a huge part of my creative process was around surrendering and letting go. And so
Mm,
yeah, I'm still in that process of surrendering and letting go and coming more into love. But there is this much deeper trust in that void, in that nothingness, that it's not gonna swallow me up or punish me in any way. So yeah, it's actually become, what I've seen is it's become the source of my creativity, is that when I allow myself to go into the void, something gets created from it. And
mm,
um, that is definitely the death. Yeah, I don't like to refer to the ego death cycle, because I think the ego does get a bad rap of,
mhm,
but it is there to show us, it's it's there to show us who we're not, so that we can
mm.
understand who we are. So it
Oh,
is
like that.
beautiful.
I
Like
really like that. Yeah.
beautiful thing, we shouldn't kill it. It's like kill the ego. It's like no, 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 we're not killing it, we're integrating it, we're allowing it to show us and point the way. It just has a way of doing that can feel uncomfortable. That's its approach. um so yes, is the answer is that as a being I feel much more integrated and much more coming from a place of love, and um really on quite a deep level have cleared a lot of that, yeah, trauma from the system, or the fear of the nothingness.
I like how you touched on you know, looking at things from love as opposed to from a darker place. That's with everything in life. So spirituality and finding who you are doesn't make it any different. It's the same thing, right? So if you're looking at any perspective, if you come at things from love, all of a sudden you go, oh wow, you can actually come from it from that place and it makes sense. So if it makes sense that way, why not just choose that? I mean, it feels so much better. So, and I
Mhm.
also, yeah, and I like how you said it shows us, the ego does show us who we're not so we can discover who we are. That's profound to me, because that is exactly kind of what I'm discovering through it, talking to so many people. And you're right, ego does get a bad rap. It's important. It allows us to be essentially who we are. So I love that. Last thing I always ask everybody, and yours might be a little bit different, but just whatever comes to you right from your heart.
Mm.
Why do you believe we come here?
Mm. What a beautiful endpoint. Mm. I believe we come here to learn. I think that we're in a school. We're in an earth school, and we're learning who we are, who we truly are, by being shown everything that we're not. And the more we learn, the more we get to stay connected to that in this experience, and um, yeah, bring a harmony to what exists and what doesn't exist, so that we start to maybe evolve as a species, as a planet, for something greater. And who knows what that greater thing is?
Mhm.
We're all on the journey learning what that is.
I always say, like, I feel like I learned something from someone or someone I've talked to. And I'm like, hey, I got it figured out. I'm good. And then something else comes. I'm like, oh,
Yeah.
I'm a little off there. So I got to adjust how I'm thinking about it. So it's like you're continuously learning. So I love that. It is an earth school. We are here to learn. So Thank you so much, Lila, for coming on. This has been an amazing talk. I really
Mm.
appreciate you taking the time today. And I always do turn to the camera and say, please continue to like, share, and subscribe to the channel. Soul Inspired keeps growing. It's because of everybody like you that keep joining and have some conversation. I keep trying to get everybody to get into the idea of open up the discussions. I love hearing everybody else's, uh, you know, perspectives or their life experiences. Those are really important for everyone to keep learning from. And then I can continue to keep having people like Lila on the show. So thank you so much for taking the time today.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. It's been such a pleasure. Yeah, such a gift. Thank you.
So